Hi, everybody, and welcome to the live stream. We have a super special guest tonight. I'm very excited about it. We are in the third week, depending on whether you count the jury selection, of the Lori Vallow Daybell trial. We have seen all kinds of absolutely crazy, mesmerizing testimony. And our guest is Lori Hellis, known to us as the good Lori, to distinguish her from the defendant Lori. Our Lori Hellis, is a retired criminal defense attorney and a veteran, and she's a true crime author. She has been following this case and is currently writing a book, Children of Light and Darkness, the Lori Vallow story. She also has a YouTube channel herself. We'll get to all of that at the end, and I've got links in the description below the video. She's already published one book on divorce for millennials, The No Nonsense Guide to Divorce, and importantly for us tonight, she has been sitting through the trial, and we have her here to give us the inside scoop on all of the drama. Now, the trial is not televised, which means we would love to have a peek inside what's actually happening there. Now, Lori, we have something special for our audience tonight. You have some of your own courtroom drama today. Let's talk a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what happened today.
Well, I do have a little bit of drama. It's really unfortunate. The courtroom has been very strictly monitored. I mean, it's more locked down than I've ever seen a courtroom before. And so we all have to petition online every morning for our ticket for the next day, and we have to have entry tickets and show ID and all sorts of jumping through hoops. And the judge has issued this conduct order about conduct in the courtroom and has absolutely banned any photography, recording, video recording, any transmission of any images in the courtroom. And so this morning I was sitting in one of the pews in the gallery, and it was early. People were still kind of filing into the courtroom, and people were wandering around. I wasn't paying much attention, frankly, to what was going on with all of the participants. I was trying to send a tweet, and suddenly the court security walked up and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Come with me and bring your phone." And I said, okay. So I stepped outside the courtroom with him with my phone, and he said, "Someone said you were taking pictures of Lori Vallow." And I said, "Well, no, I wasn't. I was messing with my phone. I was sending a tweet." So I showed the officer my phone. I gave him access to my photo gallery. I showed him the half composed tweet that I was working on. And so he said, "Well, I don't see anything here that shows that you took a picture." And I said, "Well, that's because I didn't." And about that time, another officer walked up and said, "I've been directed to seize your phone as proof as evidence." And I said, "Evidence of what? There's no probable cause. I didn't violate the order." And this officer says I didn't. So the first officer, then by this time, I'm not happy. The first officer says, no, there's nothing on her phone. The guy sort of begrudgingly goes away. So when I walked back into the courtroom and sat down in my spot again, somebody next to me said, "What was that all about?" And I said, "I don't know. Somebody said I took a picture and I didn't." Still, we're in the pre-trial or the pre-morning. Everybody's sitting down and getting organized. The attorneys go back into chambers, back and forth. So I'm not particularly paying much attention to any of it. And we all get settled in, and the judge comes out on the bench. And the first thing he says is, before we get started, I'm going to direct the deputies to remove a disruptive person in the gallery. And they come over and tell me to grab my stuff and usher me out of the courtroom. So I confirmed with the deputies that it was okay for me to go to the overflow room and listen to testimony there. I didn't say anything to anybody. People were asking and tweeting and all sorts of stuff about what was going on, and I didn't answer. I sat in the overflow room and took my notes and watched the remainder of the morning's testimony. And then at the break, the court administrator came in and said, "You have to leave the courthouse. And if you want, you can meet with the judge in the morning and discuss it." I said, "Well, I do want to." And so that's where we left it. So apparently I'm meeting with the judge first thing in the morning, and I'll know more about what's going on. But the bottom line is Lori Daybell's attorney, Jim Archibald, accused me of taking photos of her, and I didn't do it. So,
and your phone is the proof of that.
Sure. I mean, I handed it right away, handed it to the deputy, and he went through it all. So,
well, hopefully you'll be able to straighten it out tomorrow morning. And
I hope so. I hope
discuss that with the judge, because that really isn't very logical. It's odd about the lunchtime change, because there was no additional thing that had happened that would sort of justify or explain that. So I know one of the things that you've done in the case relates to unsealing some documents, and you've asked the court to unseal some documents that you think were not properly sealed. It's under consideration. Lori and I have talked about that, in case y'all are wondering beforehand. I've agreed I'm not going to talk about that anymore. We're just going to let Lori handle this, and then we'll see what happens tomorrow. I hope that this will be lifted and the judge will just realize a mistake and misunderstanding happened, that there weren't any photographs. But meanwhile, we have some great information that you can give us, because you have been sitting through the trial. You've only missed a half day so far. And probably our overall biggest question, because we're not allowed in the courtroom, we can't see all the things that are happening, is how is Lori reacting? And I'm going to ask you specifically about how she reacted to various witnesses. So I just wanted to start with an overview of what you've seen. This was also came from subscriber Nina. Now, we had the one incident where she wanted out of the courtroom before autopsy photos and certain really graphic testimony came in. But I saw your Twitter post on that, where you said she kept her head down and looked asleep after that, and it was like not a good look, which I completely agree with. What's just your overview perception of how she's reacting within the courtroom?
So initially she was almost rebellious, almost like arms crossed, and like sort of like, hit me with your best shot. She is fairly conversant and a little giggly with her attorneys. She sort of goes back and forth between talking with Jim Archibald, and then she'll direct her conversation at John Thomas. She kind of goes back and forth. It always impresses me that she's a little bit more flirty, maybe, for lack of a better word, with Jim Archibald. As time has gone on, I think she's gotten a little less of that sort of defiant attitude. The day that they offered that graphic testimony, by the end of the morning, she was sort of arms folded and head down. When they came back in, they said she wants to waive her appearance for the afternoon because it was really difficult, and her fragile mental state and all that, blah blah blah. And the judge basically said, no, the state and the victims have a right to have her present. And I thought that was a well-reasoned ruling on his part, and she stayed in the courtroom. She then spent the most of the afternoon, and there were a couple of pretty difficult photos. She spent most of the afternoon with her head down, not really looking at the witness or at the photos. And then later in the afternoon, sort of had her head down for a while, and then it became pretty obvious that she was dozing. So
Oh, was
now
she medicated?
she is medicated. She spent 10 months in the mental hospital. I'm certain she's on a cocktail of psychotropic drugs. If she was having a lot of trouble with that morning session, they may have given her something additional. I don't know, but she is medicated. So it was pretty obvious that she was at least dozy.
Okay.
So
I'd also like to ask you about how her reaction was to specific witnesses. To me, the most, I guess, impactful witness so far has been Zulema Pastinis, with Colby Ryan coming in a close second today. But her testimony has been just, it was wild. Things like Lori said she was a goddess and would lead the 144,000 at the end of time.
Right.
Lori said that Jesus himself sealed her to Chad in the temple waiting room, even though they were married to other people. Right. That Zulema was supposed to meet Lori at the temple on the day Charles died to perform a casting on Charles to try to remove the evil spirit from him, but Lori didn't show, and of course that day Charles was shot and killed. So, and she also talked about Lori manipulating Alex and telling him he was the angel who had come to Saul before he became Paul, giving him real importance. Zulema was for 11 days Lori's sister-in-law and a good friend. What was the reaction between the two as Zulema was testifying?
It was interesting because it was actually quite different from her interaction with Melanie Gibb. Now, Melanie Gibb was her other friend, and they had been very close friends. And it felt like they were pretty hostile. Lori didn't really look at her. She didn't really look at Lori. They didn't really make eye contact. And it appeared that the confrontation that happened in the audio that we heard, the phone call that she recorded, seemed to be continuing. That she was saying, "You've been deceived, and this situation's not good," and it appeared clear that they had never mended that break. That was a little bit different with Zulema. With Zulema, she was exchanging some glances, exchanging some looks. At one point, she smiled, Lori, and Zulema was being very thoughtful and very methodical about her answers. There were many times that she paused to think about what it was she was saying, and it felt like she was being a little more cautious. But I didn't have that same sense of hostility with Zulema that I did with Melanie Gibb.
I had a question about those pauses, because pauses can be interpreted different ways, and a lot of it depends on the body language and what you can kind of see. So on the audio, it would just be Zulema would be asked a question and she just didn't answer. So you're like, let me check my audio. Why is she not answering? There was one today that must have been, I think, probably a minute long, where she was asked something and said, and it was on cross-examination, she had been asked about a powerful spiritual experience she'd had. The Heavenly Father, Heavenly Mother, Jesus, the Eternal Father, all present. Right. And she said she didn't remember that day. And the cross-examination was, seriously? You have all of those people and you don't remember that? And he said, how is that possible? And she thought for like a full minute before she started to answer. And then the defense counsel just said, withdraw the question. And then it ended at that point. Right. Is that something that's hurting her credibility? Or when you see it in person, does it come across as purely thoughtful?
Well, she comes across as very nervous. She kind of leans forward. She often takes a drink of water or pours herself some water, or it's certain that the wheels are turning and that she's thinking about it. Yeah.
How is the jury reacting to Zulema? Do you sense any sort of reaction from them? Are they believing her? Not sure what to believe?
Well, I think there have been two times when I've noticed that the jury has seemed very shocked. One was in the discussion about Charles Vallow's murder, which I thought was sort of masterful, the way the prosecution managed to get that in.
Mhm.
And the other one was during Zulema's testimony, when she was testifying about all these castings and all these things going on. One of the things that I think was interesting to people was Zulema said that Lori's attorneys have filed a notice of alibi saying that she was in Arizona when Tammy died. But what was interesting was she was in Arizona and they were all at Zulema's house doing a casting to get rid of the evil spirit that was in Tammy Daybell. And at that same time, Tammy Daybell was being shot at by what she thought was a paintball gun. And so they're doing the casting. Lori then calls Chad. This is in Zulema's testimony. Lori then calls Chad and says, "Did it work?" And Zulema can only hear Lori's side of the conversation. But Lori then, according to Zulema, gets very, very scary, angry, and starts saying idiot, moron, a whole bunch of other negative things, and then says he can't do anything right unless somebody's with him. And it's clear she's talking about Alex Cox, who was there trying to take a shot at Tammy. So, I mean, if that doesn't sort of gel the conspiracy, I don't know what does. And I think the jury, I think the light bulb turned on for the jury at that point. It was like, really?
And to clarify for people who are sort of newer to the case, Tammy Daybell did die. The prosecution says of asphyxiation. That was after this attempted shot at her, which
right,
the
10 days
prosecution
later
believes was by Alex. His phone
right.
was pinged nearby,
Right.
and so they believe he actually took the shot at her. Tammy thought it was just a paintball gun, but the police think no.
Right. And they were able to link the vehicle that she said was involved, that the shooter came up in, to Alex as well. So
what about the jury's reaction to Melanie?
I didn't get the impression that they disbelieved her. I think that they were very interested with the telephone call between Melanie and Chad and Lori. They all seemed very intently leaning forward and sort of listening to that. They were probably a little harder to assess while they were listening to Melanie, but they were getting the very first inkling of this
right.
evil spirits and castings and all of those things. I mean, they were really first just getting the first of that. And I think by the time Zulema testified, there was a sense of, you can't make this stuff up, I mean, right. They were somewhat incredulous.
And today we had some, what to me was sort of unexpected and very explosive testimony from Lori's son, Colby Ryan. And from what I hear, oh, and by the way, everybody, there was an unbelievable phone call between Lori and Colby. I'll play that tomorrow. So be sure to like this video and subscribe so you can come back to hear the video tomorrow. But that phone call in which he was angry with his mother sort of carried over, it sounded like, to the courtroom. From what I read, he would not look at his mother. Tell me about what his reaction was. You may not have been able to see the jury at that point, but you could see which way Colby was looking.
Yeah, I could not see the jury at that point, but I could see on the video stream Colby, and I was interested to see he was absolutely not looking at her. He was absolutely, I would say, almost stony in his clearly angry appearance. I mean, he was not having it, and I think that's evident on the recording as well. Now, I had heard a piece of that recording, but I had not heard all of it before. And he really does. And as far as I have been told, he has not spoken to her since that recording. He called her and said, you know, what are you doing? In fact, he said, you can't hide from me. And she said, oh, I'm not trying to hide from you. You know where I was. And she wouldn't turn on the video screen. He kept saying, you won't look me in the eye. She wouldn't turn on her video screen. So it's just an audio call. And at one point he says to her, how could you murder my brother and sister? And she just keeps saying, I didn't, and you don't understand. And one day you'll understand. And he's not buying it. And so I think it was, in my mind, a very explosive call. It was the first time I knew that he had actually accused her of killing the children.
I had a question too about some of the money that went to Colby. What we had testimony about today was that money came into Tylee. Normally it would have gone into her account. That apparently was the money she personally was spending. Lori, after what is presumptively Tylee's death, moved it into going straight into her own account, and then she wrote checks from that straight to Colby. Do we know anything about that? It struck me as unusual that, he's an independent adult and his mother is writing him apparently large checks on a regular basis. Was that just their normal arrangement? Was there anything that connected him to this? Like what was that all about?
So my understanding is Charles Vallow was a very generous man. And there was a point that he was really supporting a lot of Lori's family. He was paying their auto insurance. He was paying their cell phone bills, including Lori's parents, probably Alex, and maybe other members of the family as well. And they also supported Colby quite a bit. He left home at 17, moved back home, got his GED, and decided to go on a church mission. I don't think he ever got out of the mission training center. He went to the training and 6 weeks later left his mission. Colby has a book out, by the way. It's a self-published book, and all this is in his book. And so from that point on, he had a girlfriend, and she got pregnant, and they got married. But from that point on, I think Lori and Charles were supporting Colby and his wife and baby fairly significly for an extended period of time. That's definitely the impression I got. Okay. And so we were also told that Lori was not very computer literate. And so she often would have Tylee Venmo him money or send it through Cash App or whatever. So I don't really know how that all worked. The testimony was that she transferred Tylee's money into her own account a week or two before Tylee died, toward the end of August. So Tylee was getting Social Security because her dad had died. we've also heard that there was an insurance settlement. Some people say 60,000, others say 75,000, but there was some sort of an insurance settlement for Tylee.
And there was testimony from Zulema that Lori said she had gotten $60,000 when Joe Ryan died.
Right. Yeah.
So I want to say thanks to Fishface123ism. Appreciate that. I also want to ask you about Kay Woodcock. Now, Kay and Larry are sitting stoically, I presume, through the trial. This has to be unbelievably difficult for them. What was the jury's reaction to her, obviously something she could never help, emotional reaction to what happened to her grandson, JJ?
So Kay was very poised. She was the first witness that was called. The prosecution showed her a picture of JJ. It happened to be one of her favorite pictures, she said, of him. And she got choked up very appropriately. I think the jury found her to be a really sympathetic, concerned Grammy. She was a concerned grandma. I think their heart really went out to Larry when the day that we had the really graphic testimony. The one photograph, there were a handful. I have to say the prosecution didn't overplay the graphic photos, but there was there was only actually one photo of JJ, but it was a close-up of him at his after his body was recovered. It was shown for a reason, because he was still very recognizable as JJ. Anybody who had ever known him would recognize him. That, I think, was probably the most difficult photo for people to see. And I think that was the hardest for Larry. And during those photos, he was surrounded by friends and family, as well as the victim advocate for the prosecutions for the state. But he was clearly at one point sort of leaned over, head on his knees, sobbing. And I mean, I don't know how the jury could not react to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I also wanted to ask you about Brandon Boudreau. Now, I was a little surprised, especially because he was the second witness, that the whole incident with Brandon Boudreau came in at all. I was surprised. I thought that could be an appellate risk for them. I was impressed with the way the prosecution wove that into the story. They made it pretty seamless. I would say they fit it in extremely well. I mean, they took it straight from here's how the Rexburg police got involved, here's how the Jeep came, here's how they find out about JJ and Tylee. I was very impressed with how that flowed, because I would have thought, oh my gosh, they have just bought an appeal ground here that's pretty serious. But what was your reaction to that? Was that a surprise that it came in, and that it came in so early?
It was a surprise to me, and I think it was surprising that they brought it in as early as they did. The story with Brandon is really interesting because, like many of these cases, there's a lot more to this case than meets the eye. When Brandon Boudreau and his wife, Melanie, got divorced, there were two attorneys who had been involved, and they have been involved since the beginning with the Cox family, with Melanie Boudreau, with Zulema Pastenis. These are two LA attorneys. And Lori had told Melanie early on that Brandon, she told Melanie a whole bunch of really awful things about Brandon and his character and his lifestyle and all of those things, that God had revealed it to her in the temple. Melanie went to her attorneys and told her attorneys, as if these were absolute facts, that this was true. And of course, it was a very high profile case. Her attorneys sent a news release to news organizations outlining all of those horrible things about Brandon Boudreau and his character, none of which were true. Brandon Boudreau sued and won, and they settled before they went to trial for a $12 million slander suit. And that same lawyer was in court yesterday or today and Friday, representing Zulema Pastenis.
Wow, that's fascinating.
That's what I said.
Yes, that's fascinating.
I'm like, I can't believe you can show your face around here, let alone, yeah. So he and his partner paid Brandon Boudreau $12 million in a negotiated settlement because they knew if they went to trial, he was going to get a lot more.
And I realize I'm not explaining, I'm assuming way too much, but Brandon Boudreau was married to Lori's niece, Melanie Boudreau. There are numerous Melanies. This is one of the Melanies. And right. Melanie and the niece and Melanie, I heard somebody call her. And
right. One of my friends called her Melanie.
And yeah. Brandon was her husband. They were in the process of getting a divorce as Melanie and Lori became closer and closer and more religious and began to pull away from their husbands. Charles Vallow ultimately killed. And someone shot at Brandon Boudreau, shot at him from a Jeep, which he believed he recognized as one he had gotten the insurance policy for. He was an agent and gave them the VIN number. It was traced up to Idaho, to Rexburg, Idaho, where Lori had it. It was Tylee's Jeep that had been bought for her by Charles Vallow. So that I realized I was, assuming all of that and not even explaining who is Brandon Boudreau. Right. Ironically, when we did our discussion about the whole case and explaining the whole case, I even told you before we got started, I'm going to leave out Brandon Boudreau. It's just too complicated and it's tangential. We don't need to get into that. And then he was the second witness. Right. I said, well, okay, we have to get into Brandon Boudreau because it is one of the kinds of things that makes this such a sensational case. It's the extent to which drama, murder, intrigue happened in this direction and that direction and with this person and that person. This wasn't just a one person got killed kind of a case. This is huge.
So what's interesting is that I think from a legal standpoint that bringing Brandon in early was necessary for them to bolster their whole argument that all of these things were part of a common scheme.
And I want to ask you I agree. It was very powerful with that. What happens with Chad Daybell? Because I don't think it comes in for Chad Daybell. I don't think it comes in. I mean, arguably they could start with the same train and take it up to Rexburg, but the police decided he wasn't even somebody they could charge with Charles Vallow. He wasn't there. He wasn't present. He had nothing to do with that Jeep at the time that Brandon Boudreau was shot at. What happens with Chad Daybell's case?
Well, I think that it probably doesn't come in for him. But the interesting thing was those two things were the prosecution wanted them in because clearly they show that there was some sort of a common plan or scheme, which bolsters their conspiracy argument. But even though the court gave instructions that it couldn't be used for character evidence, obviously under 404B, you can't unring that bell with the jury. So,
right.
Even though the judge is saying, well, jurors, you can't consider this to conclude that she's a bad person. But here's all this cumulative evidence about this common scheme that seems to indicate that she was elbow deep in this. So I thought I actually was more surprised at how much of the Charles Vallow incident they were able to get in. And I'm here to tell you the jury was just like, you could have knocked their eyes off. They were so stunned. Because they started out by getting it in through Melanie Gibb. Because she was able to say, they were able to ask her, what did Lori tell you about his death? bringing it in under a hearsay exception as a statement of a party. So they got it in that way, and once it was in, then they put the detective on and went through the whole story. And I thought that was pretty masterful on their part.
Right. I agree. Yeah. So one of our subscribers, one of our longtime subscribers, Marlon Mastritz, asked a good question. Who has immunity here? Do we know? Why are we not hearing about it? Do you know who has immunity, and what's the story on that?
The only person we know for certain had immunity is Zulema. And the only reason we know that is because a recording surfaced that this same lawyer, the one who's here with Zulema today, Rob Wood from the prosecution, went to Arizona to interview Zulema or to be present while law enforcement was interviewing Zulema and Summer Shiflett, Lori's younger sister. Now we haven't heard from Summer yet, but she may be on the stand now. I don't know for sure. I was told by one of my followers that they saw her downtown. They saw Janice Cox, her mother, downtown over the weekend. So the Cox family was here, and I'm assuming they were all here because Summer was being called as witness. So, but the way that this all started out with the immunity was that there was a recording that was surreptitiously made of Rob Wood having a conversation both with Summer and with Zulema over saying hello to them and talking to them before they went in for their law enforcement interviews. And he specifically mentions the immunity deal with Zulema. So we know she has one. There were a couple of other reasons why I have always thought that Melanie Gibb and Melanie Boudreau Pulowski both had immunity. Back in the early days, Lori's first attorney, who's no longer on the case, served a subpoena/discovery motion to Melanie Gibb. It was a very odd document, and Melanie Gibb would refuse to take it. She was appearing in Rexburg for the grand jury, and he had her served as she was coming out of the grand jury. And she refused to take it and left it on the ground, I think. All she kept saying was, call Rob Wood, call Rob Wood. I don't want to do this, call Rob Wood. Well, that sort of telegraphed to me that the prosecutor was the one that she wanted everybody to talk to because she had some sort of a deal. Mm-hmm. And then Melanie Pulowski had some charges filed against her for getting into Brandon Boudreau, her ex-husband's bank account after they were divorced, and after their divorce decree said she was supposed to remove herself from the account. So they charged her with some identity theft counts, and those held up for about 3 or 4 days, and then suddenly they were dismissed. And that sounded to me a whole lot like, we'll get rid of these charges if you cooperate. So
what about Zulema? What did she need immunity from?
We don't know. Yeah. I have my own speculation, but we don't know.
Related to Alex? Related to Charles?
Related to Alex.
Okay. And what about Melanie? What would she need it for? Would it be the lie to the police initially about having JJ with her, but Lori had picked him up? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Because she was never prosecuted for that.
I have some questions about the defense, as did Rhonda, one of our subscribers, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of defense here. There seems to be like almost no questions and not a lot of direction. I've been able to pick, I don't know, is it just hard to pick up on audio, or like, where are they headed? I've been able to see 3 things. One, Lori wasn't there when Tammy Daybell died. One, Chad changed Lori. Lori was good before, Chad made her crazy. And maybe kind of with Zulema that, well, Zulema was deceived by Chad, so it would be reasonable that Lori would be too. I mean, he was just super persuasive. But what is the defense?
Well, that's an excellent question, because I don't see that there has been a defense strategy or a theory of the case either. I mean, you and I both know that there are times when the only defense you really have is to try and poke as many holes in the prosecution's case and raise as much reasonable doubt as you can. But I haven't even seen them do that. That's the part I don't understand, is you don't see the prosecutors really going after anybody's story and saying, yeah, but what about this? What about that? What about, I mean, you just are not seeing it, which is suspicious to me as well.
Suspicious? What do you mean suspicious?
Well, I don't think that they have run with what would be their best argument. And that is now I know that she has said she will not agree to a mental health defense, even if one could be mounted, which I have some serious questions about. She's competent. She's in court. She clearly is oriented to person, place, and herself. So I don't know that they come up with an argument that she's unable to aid and assist. And Idaho doesn't have an insanity defense. One of 4 states in the country that don't allow insanity defense. They don't even allow guilty but insane. So what you're left with is you have to be able to attack the underlying mental state elements. I don't think that they could ever get there to say she couldn't form the intent. However, if you think that the person that you are murdering is not a human, is a zombie, then can you intentionally murder a human? I think that was their only defense.
Right.
Now, I don't know if she just said, don't go there or what, but it makes me very suspicious, because the jurisdiction where these crimes happened is heavily LDS. 96% of the population in the 2 counties where these 2 cases arose are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That includes all of the lawyers, the judge, everybody involved in this case. And I think that it has been very difficult for them to espouse to confront some of these aberrant beliefs. So the prosecution has gone down the road of this was about money, sex, and power. Mm-hmm. And the defense has not had any way to counter that this is about money, sex, and power. The smartest way to do that would be to say, no, this is about somebody who was so deeply involved in her faith that she honestly believed that her children were zombies and it was a mercy to kill them. She couldn't form the mental state to actually kill a human being.
And her belief was that they would be freed if she killed them. Wasn't that what Zulema testified to?
Right. The only way. So what Chad had told them was, once a person's soul is forced out of their body by a demon, it goes into some sort of limbo or some sort of soul jail, and it cannot be released until the body is destroyed.
So she could have been trying to protect her children with what she did, and that would be the defense that could be made.
Right. And I think that if you start there, the call with Colby then becomes really persuasive of that, because she keeps saying, someday you'll understand. You don't understand now, but this was someday you'll understand. So
Is that a viable defense under Idaho law, though? If she can't have a defense of not guilty by reason of insanity or anything in that neighborhood, can she still make this argument?
She can make the argument that she was so delusional that she couldn't form the mental state. She couldn't knowingly kill a human being because to her, that wasn't a human being. So yeah, there is a viable defense to it. But to do that, they would have to go down that road of this is a crazy set of beliefs.
Does Lori seem to understand that not much defense is being made here? Do you see any sense from her that she, at the end, she's like, wait, where are all your questions? No,
I can't tell. Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, I'm not sure.
I want to ask you about something the defense said in opening that raised some eyebrows for me.
Mm-hmm.
The defense said, I've defended 27 murder cases and your taxpayer dollars are paying me. Mm-hmm. Thank you for doing that. And said one time when I was defending somebody of a charge, my office was firebombed. I was really, really struck by that. It seemed to me, first of all, that he was trying to distance himself from his client. He's like, hey, I just get paid. I just get paid by you to defend these people like her. Right. And that it also seemed to me that could make the jury feel uncomfortable with a verdict of not guilty because his office was firebombed for being associated with someone charged with a murder. Mm-hmm. What was your reaction to that?
Well, it was pretty cringy to me too. I mean, first of all, what he said was, sometimes people don't like me because I represent, because of the people I represent. And it got so bad that once, or something along that line, one time my office was bombed. Yeah, I mean, when he said it, I was like, what? I mean, I thought that was strange. And I too thought, why would you say that unless you wanted people to know that you were associated with people who can do violence? I don't know. I mean, he's also said some things that I thought were kind of unusual. In opening statement, he said, we settle most of our cases. We tried to settle this case and we couldn't settle it. And that's why you're here. Uh-huh. And I thought to myself, I was actually surprised it didn't draw an objection from the prosecution, because settlement negotiations are off limits. So I was kind of shocked that it didn't draw an objection, and he just went on merrily talking about how they couldn't settle the case. I mean,
So here's a question I had. Jody Allen was wondering about it too. Do you think Lori will testify? What's your thought?
So I think not. Right. Although I have some followers who think she will. In fact, I have a pound of Starbucks coffee riding on it. For everybody who knows what a coffeeholic I am. I don't think so. There are a lot of people who seem to feel that she is, I don't know, narcissistic or self-absorbed enough that she'll feel like, or perhaps deluded into thinking that she's a goddess and she can sway people's opinions enough that she might take the stand. But I don't think so.
She doesn't seem to be involved enough in the trial to be calling those kind of shots. I mean, she seems to be very passive, just relying on what's being done for her. Yeah. So if they tell her not to, I don't really see her as somebody fighting back and saying, no, I want to go forward. This is not an Alec Murdoch,
No. And I think the other thing is the dynamic of the culture that she's from. Women don't assert themselves that way. So I don't see her doing it, but it'll be interesting to see who wins the coffee.
Yes, it will. Originally, this trial was predicted to be 10 weeks long.
Mhm.
That was with the death penalty. That's been pulled out. And it seems to be going really, really fast. That's just my sort of read of it. What are your thoughts? Is it going to be shorter now, or is that the scuttlebutt?
I don't see it. Well, I think that initially, when the death penalty was taken off the table and when the cases were severed, so we're not trying both defendants at the same time, they were still telling the jury 8 weeks. But I think the scuttlebutt around was, more like 4 to 6.
Mhm.
I would be very surprised if this case doesn't go to the jury in the next 2 weeks.
Okay. And somebody made a good comment. I didn't pull it up. Sorry about that. But even if Lori had mounted the world's greatest defense, even if Lori had come forward with the best possible defense, the evidence has been it's been put out well. There's been a lot of it.
Mhm.
I think she would have had a difficult row to hoe no matter what. Is that your
Well,
impression?
I agree to some extent. We haven't seen all the evidence yet. But what I will say is the prosecution is doing, I always describe a circumstantial case as
Mhm.
like a, a long chain. And you have to get every one of those links and they have to all connect. And so we haven't seen a complete connection yet. And I think one of the weaknesses of their case is they don't know where the children were killed and they don't know how Tylee died.
Right.
Um,
Right.
her remains, I think, are beyond being able to tell the cause of death. The other thing is that I had heard that they weren't sure where the murders actually occurred. Now, the alibi
Right.
notice that
That's what I was.
Lori Vallow filed says she was
Right.
in her own apartment while they died in Alex Cox's apartment. But we have yet to see any evidence that backs up that alibi report. Now, it may be coming and we haven't seen it yet.
Right.
There may be evidence that links the children to Alex's apartment. We don't know. We
Right.
do know from opening statements that Tylee's blood was found on a shovel and a pickaxe in Chad Daybell's garage in his shed.
Right.
So we can assume, we have absolutely no evidence that Tylee was ever at Chad Daybell's home for any reason. So we have to assume that those tools were used when her body was buried.
Right.
But on the other hand, I'm sure Tylee and JJ were in and out of Uncle Alex's apartment all the time.
Right.
So I don't know how they're going to make that connection.
There was testimony that the apartment was cleaned, wasn't there? And by cleaned, I mean empty, except for one closet that had some camo suits and some hazmat looking white.
Yeah, and it was a little unclear
Right.
where all of that was found because some things were found in a bedroom in Lori's apartment
Right.
that Alex was apparently living in. So it was not really clear what was found in which apartment. That might be clear in the documents, but
Right.
it
Right.
wasn't all that clear in the testimony. So, but yes, there were two white Tyvek like hazmat suits and a ghillie suit, which I thought was kind of interesting. Ghillie suits are those things that you wear to look like a bush when you're out hunting, the like camo suits. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We learned about that in the Alec Murdaugh case.
Right.
My channel folks and I learned about that there. So Molly had a question. She wanted to know, can you tell us a little bit more about something we couldn't see but heard about, which is Zelima's diagrams, those journal pages that she had?
Mm-hmm. They were they were not great diagrams to to begin with, and they were a little bit difficult to see on the screen, but they were essentially a series of circles and ovals that were supposed to explain how people could be on one world and then they could be resurrected in a different world and have different lives in different worlds. And the other piece of it was the dark and light scale. So they were not all that illustrative for diagrams.
We're not missing all that much.
No,
Okay.
not really.
All right.
Not really. Yeah. And they were just like, one of them had kind of like a long elliptical shaped element, and then a lot of little circles inside to sort of illustrate that you could have many lives on different planets. I think, okay. It wasn't all that enlightening.
So we had a question from Sparkle Plenia about what is Chad Daybell able to see and hear, and definitely is not present. I don't know that he would have access in the middle of trial, but his attorney's there, right?
John Pryor's there. He's been there every day. In fact, he was in the overflow room with me this morning. I think he's still got other cases, so I'm sure he's in and out as he needs to be. I'm certain that he will be making sure that Chad hears the portions of the case that are the portions of the testimony that are needed and relevant to what he's facing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the audio will be available. I'm sure they'll go over anything they think is critically important with him prior to the time he's actually tried.
Right.
So Don Shackelford had an interesting question. It was one of those law school kind of, So could Lori potentially go incompetent in the middle of trial? And if so, what would happen? And my thought was, and actually Kay Oatley had a similar question, like, could she act erratically in the middle of trial and then be found unfit? And my thought was, theoretically, probably yes, but it would take unbelievable evidence and conduct to convince a judge to stop in the middle of trial and find somebody incompetent. But I don't know, have you ever had it happen? I'm curious.
I've never had it happen. But so here's what's interesting is in late September, early October of last year, when the trial was still set for January, her attorneys filed an affidavit saying we're concerned that she's not competent again. And the judge ordered another evaluation. And then within about 4 to 6 weeks, they said the judge ruled that she was competent. The other thing that was really interesting is that the state went and got Michael Wellner. Now, probably nobody's heard of this guy, except that he was the forensic psychiatrist who discovered that Brian David Mitchell from the Elizabeth Smart case was malingering. Brian David Mitchell, who was the guy who kidnapped Elizabeth Smart,
right,
feigned mental illness for quite a long time and managed to convince a couple of evaluators that he was mentally ill. And then Dr. Wellner came along and spent many, many hours with this guy and determined that he was malingering. And if you look at Dr. Michael Wellner, W-E-L-L, I think it's 2 L's, N-E-R. He's got a CV that's pages and pages long. And a lot of what he has focused on is malingering behavior. So the prosecution brought him in and he was on the witness list. Now, they have not said that they are offering his testimony, and the defense has had their hackles up about it. And I don't believe that they intend to offer him as long as she's competent.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that would certainly be dynamic.
Yeah.
In the middle of trial.
Right. But my understanding is that they would pause the trial, that her case would be stayed as long as she was not competent or during a period of evaluation.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So Dawn had some questions about Chad's family because they have gone on some news outlets. They've said, we think this was all Lori's fault.
Mhm.
Lori theoretically could have had family come and do that for her, but it didn't really work out that way. Colby did say that his mother changed with Chad's influence,
Mhm.
but it was more of a hostile approach, certainly
Mhm.
than Chad's family had when they were interviewed on that.
Right.
I can't remember if it was Dateline or whatever the show was, but so what is their role going to be here? Are they off the witness list? No role here at all? What might they come
Well,
in for the prosecution?
that's interesting. We don't know. I suspect that unless their arms are really twisted, they're not going to come in it for Lori. They were not happy that their dad married someone 17 days after their mother died. They were not happy that he was having what they termed an emotional affair, which clearly was much more than an emotional affair. However, so I don't know that you're going to see them come in. The only one that potentially could be called could be Garth, and that's because he was home when Chad found Tammy or when Tammy
Right,
died.
right.
So we know that he testified at the grand jury, and we also know that his wife's mother testified at the grand jury, which presumably was about something he told her. But at this point, we don't know that he's on the witness list. And I wouldn't expect that any of his family are going to be involved.
Okay. So Donna Vadrine wanted to know about Lori wanting a speedy trial. Certainly it had and Mountain Girl 585 talked about, well, this could force an error for appeal, which I do think has certainly been one of the effects. I mean, death penalty got taken off the table because she insisted on a speedy trial. But do we have any other insight into why she was so insistent on that? Is there a personal reason as well? Or we just don't know, maybe?
I'm not entirely sure, but it is interesting to note that her father, uh, Barry Cox, is a very anti-government federalist sort of a guy. He wrote a book about how you don't have to pay taxes to the IRS, and he was definitely sort of lined up with the John Birch Society and some of the sort of fundamentalist kinds of political extremists. And so I suspect it's just something she learned in her life with him more than anything else. It may be that one of her lawyers told her it's never a good idea to waive your speedy trial. But if I had to guess, I would say that goes back to her father, Barry.
Okay. And Susan Moore had a question about your book, actually. She wanted to know, will you have a chance to interview any of the potential witnesses? Will you get an opportunity to do that while you're there at trial?
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
Basically the court has said that they're not going to release any of the discovery and any of the information around the case until the trial is over. And under Idaho's version of the Freedom of Information Act, they don't have to. There's an exception for things that are pretrial. I know that law enforcement has pretty much been embargoed from talking to the press or media until after the trial is over. I've had a couple of them say, we can't wait to talk to you. So that'll be interesting.
Good.
Yeah. And I hope that I will have the opportunity to talk to a few others.
Yeah.
I have talked to some people, at least sort of on background.
All right. So a few final questions here. Which of the witnesses has made the biggest impact so far, your view? And I'll give mine as well.
Colby.
Okay. I would say Zulema, but like I said, Colby is
Right.
that was very powerful today. Very powerful.
I think Zulema gave the jury the background that helped them sort of connect the dots on why these people were doing some of these things. They didn't get deeply into how Alex Cox died, which I was a little surprised at, but which would have been a little more dramatic, maybe testimony, but maybe they felt like that was going down too many rabbit holes. I don't know. But Colby's testimony and that entire audio recording of his call with Lori was pretty compelling.
All right. What's the most shocking new piece of information you think we've gotten in the trial?
Well, the information that Lori was doing a casting on Tammy Daybell when Alex Cox was shooting at her, that connecting up that those links of the chain, I thought that was really important, significant, because it really does go to that common scheme or plan.
I thought Zulema's testimony about it, which is right at that exact spot where Zulema said that she got off the phone and said that idiot can't do anything.
Right.
And that was right when the paintball incident had happened. I thought that was really, it would serve to connect Lori with intentionality to what happened. Like she knew what was happening. She was intentionally wanting it to happen. That's how I took that. So, okay. And final question. Let's say you're Lori's lawyer, put aside guilt or any issue about, how he's handling it. How are you feeling about where the case is right now?
I would be really worried.
It seems
based on the case that they've put on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if I were in their shoes, I'd be very worried.
Right. I completely agree. So, well, everybody, we will be covering the trial again tomorrow night, 7 p.m. I will be doing a summary of today's testimony. Tomorrow's testimony will be covering just an update to give you information about what's actually happening in the trial. We'll look to have Lori back. Lori, I hope your conference goes well tomorrow with the judge. I hope that he understands. But anyway, everybody, I will see you tomorrow night at 7. Thank you so much, Lori. I've got all her links in the description below, so you can see where her YouTube channel is. You can go to her website that talks about her book that she's writing on this trial.
Join the Quilt Guild.
Yeah, okay, there you go. I don't know if I have to put that link. I'll have to add that link.
It's in my stuff, yeah.
Okay, so thanks everybody. And I'm not supposed to thank him, but thank you, Marlon. I won't even say why, but thank you so much also to Michelle Lisa for my outro.